Welcome back to the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA. A lot of things happening. Obviously, people talking about this whole Muslim ban that Donald Trump has fired up around the country in terms of a dialogue. We're talking also about the affirmative action debate yesterday before the Supreme Court, the case presented there about the affirmative action case at the University of Texas. And if you listen to many of the arguments yesterday, if you were thinking that affirmative action might keep on going through, it may not. Okay? And we'll talk about the Abigail Fisher case there. But I wanted to get a guy in this morning who does a lot of analysis of this kind of thing. He is a former head of Metro Source radio markets around the country, over 60 different markets that he was in charge of. He's been a vice president at Westwood One Studios. He has been in this area. Head of several radio stations and also at WHTM for a while in terms of being a manager there. And he is now living out in Arizona. He is Bill Richardson, media consultant, and he joins us here this morning on the Gary Sutton Show. Hey, Bill, how you doing?
I'm great, Gary. It's good to talk with you again. And hello to everybody and all my friends back there in what seems to be a fairly chilly but just cloudy York, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, you got it. Not too bad today, but a little bit overcast. But, it is what it is. So not like it is in Arizona where it's bright and sunny all the time. But, Bill, I wanted to get into, the reporting of terrorism right now. We touched a little bit on this last week with you. But you take a look right now at Trump and the conversation that he has raised in this country about holding up on Muslims coming into the country, at least for a temporary time until we have this whole thing figured out. And, you watch how the media is reporting this, and you watch the cacophony of voices coming down from the Republicans and Democrats and leaders everywhere around the country. It's almost like they're duty-bound to get out there and get on the record and say, hey, I hate what Donald Trump's saying. What's your take on all this right now from a media standpoint?
Well, I think there's a couple of different plans in play here. One, I think he genuinely does believe that one of the things that has to happen for America to be safe and the country to continue forward in a positive way is that we have just a general conversation, that people start talking about it and stop being afraid of it. Giving him the benefit of the doubt that he has that upper end to the argument, that he just wants to have a national conversation begin, I'll give him credit for that. But I think there's also a political galvanizing that's going on. And the galvanization is important because with Donald Trump holding on to what he holds on to now in the Republican side, and as far as building the consensus for him to be the candidate, he's doing a great job of mobilizing his people. He's talking about the things that his people want to talk about. He's using the buzzwords. He's using the proper words. And he is making those people even more in lockstep, probably a poor choice of words when I think about that.
I got you. Yeah.
With what he wants and what he wants politically to achieve. And I think he is a brilliant negotiator and probably going to be a brilliant politician. A lot of people aren't seeing him as a politician, but he's as much a politician as anybody else in Washington or anywhere else right now.
Rush Limbaugh said something to the GOP candidates on his show yesterday, and he said, if it's going to be that easy for Hillary to beat Trump, why can't you? Is Hillary that much better than you? I was really interested in that statement yesterday. Wanted to get your thoughts on it.
I think that, Donald Trump has tapped in, and he's the first person to do it in quite a while, and the Republicans needed someone to do it, but unfortunately I think he's gone a little farther off the edge than they wanted the party to go, but he's the first person that's been able to tap into the American Republican general population and their disappointment in the party and in government in general, and he's been able to mobilize those things and make people at least feel like, yeah, he's saying what if I had an opportunity to say, I'd say. That's exactly what I would say to these guys, and I like that straight talk. And whereas Republicans in John McCain and some of the others we've seen in the past just were too much of a politician and were too quick to kiss the baby and not realize the baby may be pretty ugly, and sometimes you just have to say it.
Well, and the other thing that they were missing, it seems to me, was passion. There wasn't passion with what they were saying. And whether you think Donald Trump's passion is misplaced or well placed, that depends on the taker out there. Passion is still something that we admire. I mean, when someone seems to believe what they're saying, when they seem to bring passion to the table on it, we perk up a little bit more as, I think, constituents in this country.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, and I think he's a master at it. Again, giving him the benefit of the doubt that it's genuine, but even if it's not, he is an absolute master at it. And again, that's how Donald Trump has begun to really dominate this Republican primary race, because he is perceived to have that passion. He's perceived to be the guy who speaks from the heart. He speaks from the hip. Therefore, it has to come from the heart, because he wouldn't say these things. He's a smart man, supposedly, and all those things that people are talking about.
He tells us that all the time, right? That he's a smart man. But I say a tongue firmly implanted in cheek. But you're right. I mean, the idea that here's a guy who talks from the heart. And when you think about it, the regular person out here in America doesn't walk around speaking with a telestrator in front of them. They don't get prepared speeches. Most people would be afraid to make that. And yet when they talk where? From passion, from the heart. And so when they see somebody who's finally doing that compared to a whole lot of automatons who have been going the other way for a long time and spouting the company line, people will say, whether you like it or not, that's refreshing. That's something different. I'm willing to listen to that a little bit longer, maybe, because it does sound different from the slamming door of the regular political cacophony of robots.
Yeah, and what I think is interesting, for years and years and years politically, the big question that the media always raised as kind of a litmus test was, who is the guy you'd want to sit in your backyard over the summer and have a beer with? I don't think Donald Trump is the guy that anybody is sitting there saying, I want to sit down and have a beer with him, because he's not that cool. That's not what he is. That is not Donald Trump. Donald Trump is perceived as a champagne and caviar at the top of the Mark restaurant and the whole bit, or in places that you and I would just, if we go once in our life, it's to celebrate one of the high points of our lives, and he goes there every day for lunch. But it's one of those things. So it's not the beer thing, but yet it is. It's the personality of the guy you want to sit and have the beer with.
I think for a long time we were hunting for the Kennedy-esque kind of candidate. Not necessarily John Kennedy, but Kennedy-esque in that you had a person who was wealthy, who was well-to-do, who came from a rich family and all that stuff, and yet had a touch for the common man somehow. And Trump, as I'm listening to you talk, kind of maybe crosses that chasm a little bit. Am I wrong on that, or is that worth talking about?
Not at all. I think you're absolutely right. And he's done that through his television. Before this, nobody would have thought anything about that. But, it's hard. It's hard for me sometimes to think we're electing a guy because he, made a catchphrase, "You're fired."
Exactly right.
To base the American economy on a guy who went on TV every week and told somebody they were fired, that was a well-known and well-liked celebrity in this country, and he was firing him because he didn't fit the Trump mold, kind of made me laugh a little bit when you think about this is the guy we're going to put in charge of our economy and get more jobs.
And yet we understood a guy, because we all have jobs, who gets fired. And that's something we don't see many times for people who don't seem to be accountable to anybody. They don't seem to get fired. Politicians don't seem to get fired. People who do bad jobs in government don't seem to get fired. And all of a sudden, in the world of reality, people get fired, no matter how silly the task was on the reality show, whatever. I mean, they got fired. And so then you got to also see Donald Trump, the person, who wasn't afraid to go out there and be a person in front of you there. And so when he got into this whole thing, Bill, I said, this guy will spin rings around everybody else. And this is before he even got started, as far as the media, because he understands the whole media thing better than any other Republican candidate out there, which you don't have to go very far because most Republican candidates don't understand the media at all. But the point being, this guy was going to spin rings around him. Well, it has come to pass. He's spinning rings around him with the media, like it or lump it.
Well, yeah, and it's hard for, it's funny because I think there are other candidates out there for the conservatives to rally around if they choose to. Conservative Republicans do have other choices, but they're being smothered out of any media attention because of Donald Trump. The immediate media attention goes to what Donald said today, and what Chris Christie or Jeb Bush or Marco Rubio or Carson or anyone else says gets kind of lost in the shuffle, and they end up spending more time reacting to what Donald Trump said than they do to actually engaging in something that they want to talk about.
Well, something else there too, Bill. I think you just raised a great point that the political class is still in denial and disbelief that this guy could possibly be beating them. It reminds me when John Kerry said about George Bush. He said, "This idiot's beating me? Are you kidding me?" I mean, these people are out there going, "This guy is this far out there and he's beating us." They cannot believe that the American people are rejecting what many of them have been involved in before. I'm looking this morning at a great piece in the Wall Street Journal by Janet Adamy, and it says America's middle class is no longer the majority. And right there it says it. You had 120.8 million adults in middle-income households in early 2015 compared with 121.3 million in lower and upper-income households combined. And a lot of middle-class people are saying, what about us? Where do we go? And you see a lot of this sniping and a lot of this feeling coming from the so-called middle class, whatever's left of it right now.
Right, and the study that some of the stuff that you're quoting from, I was looking at it yesterday, and it does talk about how the middle class has shrunk. I mean, the people who are considered middle class Americans has shrunk, and unfortunately, at this point, the upper class, the true upper class, the Donald Trumps of the world, now as far as America is concerned, control half of all the income in the United States goes to that small group of people. As the middle class becomes smaller, and as parents, we all look back and say we want better for our kids. As grandparents, we look back and we dream of the good old days. And as we have become voters now, we're starting to look at who can bring that back to us. And we don't see the current list of politicians being the guys who can pull that off.
Man, did you ever just hit a great? You just hit a great point though. That so they look at Donald Trump and they say, well, here's a guy who created wealth. Okay, he started with $1 million and he created a lot more wealth than that. So maybe he could help to create wealth for me. Is that the equation that we're looking at right there?
I think that's exactly I think that's the door opening scenario. That's the thing that opens the door for guys to look at Donald Trump, that he created wealth, whether, again, if it's true or not, whether or not he declared bankruptcy and used bankruptcy laws to get around paying back money he owed. None of that stuff matters when you're looking at the television, the fantasy world of the reality TV that was created to show us what Donald Trump really looks like.
And the other point on that, Bill, I think too is the idea that here's a guy that says not so much create wealth for me, but if he knows how to do that, maybe he could show our country how to do that again. Again, perception or reality, we're not quite sure on that yet, as you rightfully point out.
Exactly right, and I think that at least that's where my head is as I analyze it so far, where the Trump campaign is. They're brilliant. It's a brilliant campaign that, again, mainstream politicians are not giving him credit. Nobody on the Republican or the Democratic side uses the media as well as Donald does. Nobody is going to learn how to do it in a short term. Even if they recognize, okay, I've got to be more like that, they're not going to be able to pull that off. The few people, I have to laugh when I see the candidates trying to get on the late night shows, as Bill Clinton did effectively. Everybody wants to be on the late night shows now. And the only one I think that plays that well is the guy not doing it is Trump. I think Chris Christie does it very well.
Yeah.
But it's just, I'm just surprised that a lot of people, they're seeing it. They're trying to gravitate towards it. but they just don't know how to do it.
And did you ever hit a brilliant point this morning? Because what you have now is you basically have a whole lot of people who have been part of that whole political class talk the language that only they understood, and it didn't make any sense, and it didn't have to have anything accompanying it as far as action. And now they have a guy who's calling for action, a guy who's out there being brash, and they say, well, geez, how do I do that? Well, geez, I sound very, very kind of like a fish out of water when I try to speak that language. Bill, we're going to take a break. We're going to come right back here. Bill Richardson with us on the Gary Sutton Show. We'll take some calls as well. 1-800-357-0910 is our number. Right back with more as Bill Richardson breaks down the media here on WSBA. Welcome back to the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA. Bill Richardson, media consultant, with us as we break down the media and their coverage right now of Donald Trump. You know, Bill, it's interesting before we get to a caller here. Ash Carter said something yesterday, and this is the kind of thing that I think Americans are upset about. And it's this kind of lack of common sense and lack of sense of urgency. I've been using those terms a lot. Lack of sense of urgency among many of the leaders in this country. Ash Carter's up before a Senate committee yesterday, and he says, we are at war with terrorism, okay? And he says, we're at war. So people say, okay, what is war? And then we see and we hear about the missions that we're flying against ISIS over in Iraq right now, okay? And we say, okay, we're flying missions against ISIS, but 80% of the flights are coming back with their ordnance still on board. Does that sound like we're at war? War is kind of the unconditional, try to dismantle the other side and make them want to stop. That's kind of what war is. War is not pretty. It's not. It's ugly. There's lives involved. There's catastrophic destruction, and yet we say we're at war. And so people sit out here and say, wait a second, that doesn't make any sense to us. And that's kind of what a lot of this is about right now, isn't it? Making common sense out of what these people have told us before they're doing, but they're not really doing anything.
Well, I think you hit it on the head a few minutes ago when you started talking about where politicians are using the words that only they understand. And, the saying that we're at war has a lot of different connotations. There's a political connotation. There's a geopolitical connotation, the whole bit. And it's a word that the American media has allowed to kind of get diluted. And unfortunately, we've watered down to the point where it doesn't mean what it used to mean.
Right.
And the veterans of our world who went through wars, I see it as a different connotation than the 60s and 70s kids and the 80s and 90s kids of the day who start to see it as, war doesn't mean the same thing to us. It just doesn't. Yep. The word doesn't carry the same gravitas that it does to older Americans.
No, you're exactly right.
And it's the language, it's the watering down of the language that has caused politicians to not be able to connect with the electorate like Donald Trump has. It also has watered down the ability to do effectively what it is we'd like to try to get done.
And no one is going to accuse Donald Trump of watering down the language right now. That's for sure, right?
Exactly.
Let's go to Tom in New York. Tom, you're on the Gary Sutton Show with Bill Richardson. Go ahead, Tom. Your turn to make the call.
Whether it's now or in the recent past, the cumulative effect of Trump being criticized, I want to make some comments to the man's defense. Trump and a lot of other, actually virtually every other wealthy person on the face of this earth are wealthy for one damn good reason. They produce goods and services people are willing to part money with, or they inherited the money from an ancestor of theirs who did do that. So for all you envy-filled, jealousy-filled scumbags who can't stand the man, grow the hell up. I don't want to live in a third-world hellhole. And another thing I want to say in defense of Trump and to a lesser degree Cruz, I want a president who's going to change these rules of engagement, that when we send Marines and airmen and sailors and soldiers from the Army and the Coast Guardsmen into war, that with the training they get in boot camp, if someone threatens them or they're told to go destroy something or destroy someone, they're not going to go through a 30-point checklist while the other guy has got Uzis blowing away at them. I want that soldier, or Marine, or airman, or sailor, or Coast Guardsman to blow holes in those people and then go to the hometown that's...
Okay, Tom. I think you got you. Tom also will not be accused of watering down the language. I don't think this morning, Bill. But, he makes a point, that here we are. We don't want talk. We need to have action. And we've had way too much talk. I mean, we've had a president. Everybody says, this president can make a great speech. But, where is the action? And when the action comes, it seems to be action that is not necessarily the way America has done action before.
No, and he makes a very valid point that people who cover the Pentagon, who I am friends with and we've talked a lot about, that, the general consensus is, as you were talking about, our planes are coming back with their ordnance still attached to the wing, is that, the rules of engagement for the American fighters is different, and so many constraints of when they can and can't actually act, that it is a different ballgame for us than it is for the people who we're fighting.
And there are many people that say, well, then we're sending people into harm's way with the chance that they could be, let's say, shot down, although ISIS doesn't seem to have that ability too much. But point being, that's a pretty bad thing. Hey, I want to touch with you very quickly before you leave, and we don't have much time, about a minute here. But the affirmative action case before the Supreme Court yesterday, this Abigail Fisher, who says the University of Texas denied her admission because of her race, spoke outside the Supreme Court on Wednesday after the hearing on the race in college admissions. And what was interesting is some of the comments that came out of this. One of those from Antonin Scalia, in a remark that drew muted gasps in the courtroom, Scalia said that minority students with inferior academic credentials may be better off at a less advanced school, a slower track school, where they do well, quote unquote. But you heard a lot of those kind of comments coming out of that yesterday. About 30 seconds. Final thoughts from you on that particular case.
I think that where we thought some of this was behind us, affirmative action is going to continue to be as big a question and problem for us to deal with as race issues have always been. We haven't really made as much progress there as we think we have. And again, it's partially because of society, but it's partially because the media, in our 60-second capsulized, here's what happened today, doesn't really tear some of these issues apart and give you both sides so you can make an informed decision.
Bill, really appreciate you being with us this morning, man. You're on top of your game. We're going to have this up at Facebook.com/910WSBA tomorrow for everyone to hear it again. If you didn't get to hear it the first time, great segment. Bill, I look forward to talking to you soon, my friend, and take care.